Thank you for your interest in this community history webinar series. This series is designed to showcase community and local history projects from throughout Canada. In each webinar, we will learn from project coordinators as they discuss their local history, the framework of the project, and highlight some of the challenges they may have faced throughout. My name is Jessica Knapp, and I am the Online Engagement Coordinator for Canada's History Society, and I will be your host today. Canada's History Society is thrilled to be able to offer this webinar series as we are dedicated to promoting greater popular interest in Canadian history, principally through our publishing, education, and recognition programs. If you want to learn more about Canada's History Society, I encourage you to go to www.canadashistory.ca. So today's webinar features Paul Gareau. Dr. Paul Gareau is Métis and an assistant professor in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. He is the academic lead for the Indigenous Canada Massive Open Online course, which is what we will be discussing today. His research focuses on the Métis Indigenous religiosity, youth, gender, la francophonie, and rural Canada. It is an absolute pleasure to have Paul be a part of this webinar series and for us to be able to learn about this course in this way. It's very special. I would like to welcome Paul to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I hope everyone hears me. If you do, just do a little yes in the comments. I'm very honored to be here for this webinar. This is the first time I ever do this. So it's a bit nerve-wracking and a bit of a unseen field of adventure. So I'm very happy that you're here and we're here together. So today I'll be discussing my role in the Indigenous Canada MOOC that the Faculty of Native Studies has created over the last couple of years. So the title of this presentation is Indigenous Perspectives on History and Contemporary Issues Online. So we're talking about communities but then we're also talking about online, these massive online courses. So I hope today that you'll have some insight on how we bridge the gap by focusing on Indigenous ways of being and knowing, allowing us to bridge that gap and to do a pretty amazing product that we're very happy with, a very amazing course. So we'll follow along, and you'll see I'll be using some of these little green dots here. Welcome, Christina from Lac La Biche. That's great. So if you see these things, we'll follow along that way. Good. So in all good form, I would like to recognize that the University of Alberta is on Treaty 6 territory, and that's where I am right now. Edmonton also, and the university also sits on Papas Chase traditional territory, which is very important to recognize how they were displaced and by the growing of this city and this urban landscape, as well as the Métis homeland that stretches all across the prairies, as the prairie provinces, and into the U.S. and Ontario and BC and WT. So in this moment, I also, because we're on an online forum, to take a moment to recognize the Indigenous territories that you currently reside in, right? So to reflect and see the importance of acknowledging Indigenous territories in its multiplicity, and its relationality. So I would like to take a moment here to show you the trailer, and I think Jessica will have it set up. The trailer that sort of gives you a nice overview of what this course is about.
Indigenous Canada is a unique online learning experience that emphasizes Indigenous perspectives and worldviews. The collective intention of this course is to tell Canadian history from an Indigenous perspective. It's a 12-module course that investigates issues important for understanding the past and current relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous societies. Topics include Indigenous worldviews, fur trade, environmental impacts, legal systems and rights, political conflicts and alliances, political activism, and contemporary Indigenous life, art, and expressions. Faculty and staff at the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta developed the core vision of this course: And the rich and diverse content that emerged is due to the generosity of the many Indigenous authors, artists, elders, and knowledge keepers who gave their time to the project. We have so much to share with you. Come and engage with the perspectives of Indigenous peoples in our complex relationship with Canada in Indigenous Canada.
Excellent. So if ever you want to see, it's a great video. If you ever want to see a non-choppy version of the trailer, you can always go to the Faculty of Native Studies website, and all our information is there, and those trailers are there, as well as other films, short films that we made about, so promotional films about breaking down stereotypes that relate to each of the different modules. Good. So we'll be coming back to the PDF here in a second. Good. Okay. Excellent. So my name is Paul Gareau. As you know, I'm from a village called Bellevue near Batoche, Saskatchewan. I'm Métis, and I also wanted to present the presenters in the show as well, and the MOOC as well. They are an integral part of the MOOC in terms of organizing and performing. So Dr. Tracy Bear, who's from our Faculty of Native Studies, who's from Montreal Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. Alana Mandamin Shawanda, who's from Wikwemikong First Nation in Ontario. And Isaac Twin, who is from Sawridge First Nation. They, like I said before, these are the faces. They're not objective faces. These are people who are engaging in the development of the MOOC and put a lot of their time and energy into this project, right? So they are our guides along the way of learning. So what happened about 3 years back, I'll be looking at it, is that when it comes to Indigenous perspectives in Canada, there's a real we kind of faced with these overall structural problems, right? So the first one really has to do with the first point here, is the lack of representation in terms of the experience of Indigenous people in Canada. And I'll break this down a little bit more in terms of what that looks like towards a conventional understanding of Canadian history. But this lack of representation not just means the importance of seeing Indigenous people coding brown or coding white in presenting or on TV or in books and things, but also Indigenous ways of thinking and speaking and knowing, right? So so for us, there was a need, there was a lack of that kind of telling of history. So we want to find different ways to tell history, because there was always this very Eurocentric telling of history. There's a start and there's an end, but it never always reflects Indigenous ways of being, right? And then the last point that we have here is that we also wanted these kinds of experiences and this knowledge to be readily available to a larger audience, right? So this is essentially the starting point for why we did the MOOC and why we were focusing on what could we do to change things, to make things happen that reflect our Indigenous epistemologies and ways of being and knowing. One major push that is kind of the groundswell of experience of our faculty and of doing this project were the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's activities and mandate. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission wasn't the impetus for this project, but it reflects this groundswell, this wave that a lot of Indigenous academics and communities and people have been pushing to present a reflexivity towards settler society and the legacy of colonialism and its effects on Indigenous people in this country, right? So for me, I wanted to point out the Truth and Reconciliation as this major force, currently a major force that's bringing Indigenous perspectives into into normative society, into normative Canadian society. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is an important aspect of this work that we're doing, though it's not reflective of like, it's not done in collaboration, but it's part of this movement of Indigenous engagement or indigeneity or indigenization of the public sphere. So the start date wasn't 2014; it was more like 2012, where the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta, with the former dean Brendan Hokowitu, who is Maori from New Zealand, looked towards what could we do to make this happen? What could we do to present Indigenous perspectives into conventional society, to present it to settler society, to present it to Canadian society in general. So the University of Alberta had been investing a lot with Coursera and presenting these massive open online courses that are free courses offered globally. And these are massive courses, right? A lot from Cambridge and the more elite schools. So the University of Alberta were very thrilled of the prospects of doing an Indigenous Canada MOOC, right? So for us, we put, this is before me, but Dr. Tracy Bear and Elena Rosen were really the spearheads towards creating this shared effort between the faculty members and some community stakeholders here in Edmonton towards developing a 12-week course that has videos and course notes, interactive art pieces, maps, and quizzes. But it's really happening here on Treaty 6 territory and in our faculty. So to do this massive online course, we had to sort of communicate what does it mean, what does Indigenous knowledge mean, and what does the Indigenous transmission of knowledge mean on an online source or an online perspective. So we kind of broke it down into these different points here. The first being positionality. What is important to Indigenous knowledge is who is talking and from where, right? So it's not just the individual, but the collective that the individual is part of as well. Like for me, intersectionality or positionality always has to do with who I am as a Métis person and the community that recognizes me, right? So that had to be strongly asserted in this online course. The next one is this idea of learning from the land, traditional environmental knowledge or TEC. That is a major, that is the undergird of all traditional knowledge and relationships and engagement of Indigenous people, different Indigenous people. So that had to be asserted. The idea of storytelling, that knowledge is transmitted along this idea of positionality and traditional, and the land is always transmitted through storytelling, allowing for a metaphorical but intergenerational transmission of knowledge, right? And then also honoring our relations and honoring our knowledge keepers who are not all, who are outside of the academy, right? So these are the elements that we were faced with in terms of the important elements of Indigenous engagement that needs to be part of this course. So some of the bumps along the way that I talk about here in this slide, it has to do with how do you deal with a global perspective, of the local, right? So our focus, so kind of dealing with the pluralism and pan-indigeneity of the content of the course. This idea of who's talking and from where, these elements constantly have to be reasserted to know where people are coming from, so that it doesn't become an object of study or an object that can be appropriated. It's always linked to the land and its communities and the people and the people who, the beings beyond people who are in our environments, right? So in the course, one of the big tricks was like, how do you present worldview when we're talking about the local? So the history of Sky Woman, which is a Haudenosaunee or Iroquois story, which has become a pan-Indigenous story, needs to be spoken, but as well as Wisaki Jack, the Nehiyawak or the Cree history of the beginning of the world, right? So these are the kinds of ways that we engaged this pan-indigeneity, or this broader scope of how do we speak about the community, right? So generalizations and specificity, trying to figure it out. How do we talk about all this pluralism of Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit experiences in ways that are meaningful to Indigenous people as well as non-Indigenous people? The second part of our, one big part of our concern as well was this idea of commodification, which happens a lot. This idea of commodifying knowledge and commodifying Indigenous perspectives towards non-Indigenous audiences. So it's always kind of how do we negotiate that? How do we put this into the world and make sure that it always honors the people who told their stories, right? So our goal ultimately, even though there's these tricks not tricks, but these challenges that we have, our goal is always to communicate Indigenous experiences in Canada. So these are the processes. What's the next step? How do we do it, right? So the way that we organized it, in contrast to typical or conventional history of Canada, was to look at things in terms of thematics, right? So how did we organize our work? We recognize our limitations and keeping that goal in mind, and our focus is always Indigenous experience, right? So if you look here, we are always trying to break this conventional history of Indigenous Canada, which is something that still happens today. So I'll just walk you through it. So Canadian history is placed in this context, right? It's told, this is the story that's told, that there's pre-contact, European contact, fur trade, industrialization in modern Canada. And many history books, history textbooks for a 200 level class, like this is a 200 level course. Many of them follow this line of thinking, right? So in this structured understanding of Canadian history, we have here an Indigenous or sort of an objectification of Indigenous people and what their role was. So in contact, we have Indigenous people ruling the lands, and then through contact, they become helping hands for the inevitability of colonization, right? Through the fur trade, we see these as deepening unequal partners that assert this nascent European engagement with industry and capitalism and things like that, right? And then through industrialization, we see Indigenous people, especially industrialization. I link it to the rise of the modern state, so that Indigenous people become wards of the state or marginalized, right? So First Nations people become Indians, right? And everyone else becomes nothing, right? And then in modern Canada, and we can see this with many of the issues today, that there's an Indian problem, right? That that there's this idea of if you don't, you get civilized or not. So this is the kind of narrative that we are trying to negate and unpack, as well as get to change, to transform, right? But there's a recognition of that this narrative still plays out. Like I always talk to my students and say, this narrative plays out in the new Canadian passport. So if ever you have a chance to look at the passport, you see the telling of Canadian history along these same lines. So it's an interesting thing to recognize, but it's also a time for us to transform. So for us, when we're talking about the MOOC and how do we tell this Indigenous story, this experience of Indigenous Canada, we start to working towards thematics, right? So if you can see my cursor here, we start with worldview, with how Indigenous people see the world and see ourselves in the world, right? So this up till about number 6 is a historical kind of. It follows along that same path of like working through history towards the modern period, but it tells it from an Indigenous perspective, right? So a lot of history books that I've seen focus a lot on fur trade. but that's just one theme along many. So trick or treat is the experience of treaty making. New rules, new games is also the idea of building the country, and then killing an Indian and the child has to do with residential schools. But all this history, we're trying to reformulate or present an Indigenous perspective. And then we have here Red Power, Sovereign Lands, which are thematically based um, on political movements, as well as traditional engagement with land, Indigenous people with land. And we have here thematic perspectives of the importance of looking at women and Indigenous women and their role in Indigenous societies, as well as urbanization, current social movements, and art, right? So this packaging, it seems way more effective way of telling Indigenous stories, that there are interlinks, but that thematically reflect these important aspects of what it means to be Indigenous in this country, right? So, thank God Tracy and Elena went in this direction to make it work. So the work that we did, as I spoke of before, was very collaborative, which means sharing knowledge between senior and junior academics in our faculty, as well as community input. We couldn't go to every community or to each community, but we had to do with the ones that we are connected to, right? Which can be sort of a shortfall for the breadth of Indigenous experience, but it's always focusing on who we are and where we are, right? Um, but it is very collaborative from the start, which has its drawbacks as well as getting productivity done. Um, but our discipline was very multidisciplinary in terms of not just history, but political science, geography, gender studies, right? But what's really wonderful about this MOOC and this course is that it's focusing on Indigenous studies as a discipline, so that Indigenous studies is the discipline in which we are all circling and engaging in. That's our circle of engagement, which is really wonderful. So, and just to give you an example of how we are telling this story differently, on this slide, I focus specifically on killing the Indian and the child. Our one MOOC theme on residential schools. Residential schools right now, as you see in the news and stuff, and the TRC, it's a very volatile and traumatic topic, and it's filled. There's a lot of denial of in conventional in some parts of Canadian society, denial of the impact of these schools or what was going on. So for us, we needed to present a new way to tell the story that wasn't that told the truth of the matter, but without fully affronting some of the values that are locked in to this notion of school and structure. So for us, we started with Indigenous teaching and learning. So to speak about how Indigenous people, in a general way, how they taught their children, right? This idea of the community raising children together, of letting the children lead, so it's just like to have a basis in which to understand how residential schools were a technique of civilization, indoctrination towards Western civilization, how it was a completely alien understanding to Indigenous knowledge and knowledge preservation and transmission, right? So that leads to a better understanding from broader Canadian society to take responsibility, to understand what is behind the residential schools, to understand the truth and hopefully move forward, right? So for us to tell that story differently was a challenge, but I think it's an important and sensitive way to tell this story, this important story of Canadian history, right? So if ever, hopefully after this, if you haven't done it, or hopefully after, you'll have a chance to go into this course and see what I'm talking about, and the reasoning behind telling stories this way, um, which are very effective. So from the previous slide, and from the previous where I'm at right now with the discussion, we talk about how, especially when we talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, settler society or non-Indigenous people in Canada have it's become a really strong um, outcry and output of like what is this history? Where do we turn? How do we implement the TRC recommendations? We don't know. It's like it's always this. There's always this silence that follows Indigenous experience since for 150 years, right? There's been a really strong outcry from settler society, from Canadians, from settler Canadians, non-Indigenous Canadians, as to where to turn. So our Indigenous Canada MOOC has been really successful. Like for a University of Alberta MOOC in Canada, it's we implemented it in March 15th, 2017, less than a year ago, and we've already have over 19,000 learners in Canada. Like we have 30, like according to this, we have 32,000 visitors. So like a strong fraction of that are enrolled and active learners. Like if I had more time, we could do comparative with other MOOCs that are offered in U of A, but this number of active learners is double than many many other MOOCs in U of A, and almost 3,000 course completers, which is excellent. So people who are really invested in hearing this story and going for it. So we're really surprised. And Coursera at Christmas time or at the holiday break, they were winter break, they were like, this Indigenous Canada MOOC is the #1 in Canada. Which we were really dumbfounded by. So there's this large, because we never really sent it off other than that initial time, sent it off to get it promoted or anything. So it's been a real sort of groundswell of where do we turn, where do we get information on this, how do we learn, right? So here are a few breakdowns of who is involved, who is taking the course, and one that I want to motion to is this idea that there's an 82% of not students who are interested in this course, which I think says a lot with the broader Canadian society in trying to figure out, this history, this untold story, right? So numbers are numbers. You can interpret it whichever way you like, but this I think, is a very interesting point, perspective to take in. And then we have many women who are invested in this course, which is really wonderful. It's more than average. There's other courses offered by U of A, one on mountains, on alpine culture and geography and stuff. Really excellent course, and one on dinos, on Dino 101. But most of them have more of a balance of gender of people taking the course. But a lot of women are taking this course between 25 and 34. So this number here, the age of 25 and 34. So it's really wonderful. All these women taking this course. Good job, women out there. So, and here's a few testimonials I just wanted to put out there, because a lot of people really love this course, and I'm really honored and sort of flabbergasted and by the outpouring. So, like for here, one of our learners wrote, "I'm a settler. And this course was really helpful in giving Indigenous people's worldview and view of history of this land. Right? I feel empowered by the approach, its interviews, its artwork, its scholarly discourse." So people are very engaged in this on an emotional level, which is really kind of what we were looking for, right? So already this is how do you say it? It exceeds our expectations, but it's exactly where we want to be, right? To give people in Canada Indigenous people as well as non-Indigenous people a moment to be emotional about this material and to engage in, to soak it in, right? Um, as best as they can. So just to wrap up here, I'm already past date, is that we are still in our early days. We still are changing things in the videos and in the books and another books and the scripts. So we're still always learning on how to tell this story correctly, with honor and with sensitivity. Um, I we are very happy that this is a viable response to the TRC for a lot of Canadians. That this 12 module course will offer a good step forward towards making relationships with Indigenous people, making relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I really see it as filling in a gap of knowledge and experience and culture in this country. Like I said before, this idea of the silence is what is there's a silent killer, right? And the silent killer is silence. So to be able to hear Indigenous experiences and voices, and to just have this moment is already a great and valuable thing to have, and then to disseminate this as far as we can. So we've already been approached, the Faculty of Native Studies, approached by libraries, EPL in Edmonton, and libraries in Alberta, government agencies and schools on to to do more with this presentation, with this course. I know in Morinville, the library in Morinville, which is a small town north of Edmonton, have been doing circles, so like learning circles, each for each module, and they relate it back to. They start with prayers from local Indigenous elders, and each module they'll watch the material and then talk about it afterwards, and it's very successful because it unpacks the experience, the guilt, the things that stop us from engaging one another, right? So it really is not um, uh, to be overzealous or whatever, but this is the road to reconciliation in many ways, is to see these interactions as elements and moments of building back our relations. It's really a first step to those relations, which is extremely important, especially in this time now of the injustice happening in Saskatchewan and Manitoba with the Stanley trial and the trial with Colton Boushie and the trial with Tina Fontaine. These are moments that educate and unpack the background um, injustices of colonialism and its effect on all of our society. So I thank you very much for your attention and your openness to be here with me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was an incredible presentation. I, I'm almost speechless with how powerful this course is, and I don't know. I think calling it just a course is almost doing it an injustice because it is active on so many levels, locally, globally, communities. Um, you know, in one place and communities everywhere. There's a sharing learning circle, and people are coming together to learn. And I don't know if we could ever ask for anything more. Obviously, everybody can take the course and continue to learn and share what they have learned with the people in their own communities. But wow, absolute wow from me over here.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking us through this.
You're welcome. Absolutely. And it's the Morinville case of in community engagement is just one. I was contacted by UBC Okanagan campus, and they've been doing something very similar at UBC Okanagan, of taking the MOOC and then every Wednesday engaging with the Silix Okanagan Nation First Nations from that territory, the territory that they live on, to unpack these relations between settler and indigenous peoples. So it's really like this is just a tool that allows for the potential to speak to one another, right? To engage in healthier relations and understanding.
Absolutely. That's it's a tool that works in different ways for different people, right? Everybody is at a different point in their learning journey, and it's great to see so many people who are not in school that are taking this, that are not a student, that are enrolling in this course.
Absolutely.
Definitely shows there's a lot of lifelong learners
Yeah,
out there that want to continue engaging
that's
with
right.
history, with Indigenous history, and not just history, as you've explained. This course is not just based in history, so that is very powerful. So I'm saying all of these things,
Mhm.
but I would like to open up the floor to questions for everybody that is in the room with us at this time. I have a few of my own, but please, I would love to hear them. I'm sure Paul would love to hear some questions as well.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you,
Daniela.
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 Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think what's interesting about this platform here and to reflect, because the course is it's so broad, in terms of like it really reflects the ethos of our faculty of being on the land, right, and presenting ways of thinking and knowing and being that reflect this land, right? So to reach out beyond the academy is a really excellent thing. That's why I point back to those numbers. Is that like so if it's expanding beyond the academy that is normative to Coursera, that's great. This is great news, right? So yeah, and then again coming back to your course to this topic here is that how do you tell these local histories on a broad sense, right? Like indigeneity for me is always tied to my local. So I would love to hear what you guys think about those challenges and stuff, to hear your reflections on that, on this slow typey way of being.
And that's what's so special for me about seeing this course. And, the first time I came across it was on social media, and I thought, oh, what an interesting way to learn. What a very accessible way to learn. And then from there, and then taking the course and seeing how it all came together and how this course is supporting so many different types of people and so many different types of learners. So I did want to ask you a question, Paul, while Christine is typing, which is about
Mhm.
how this space you've carved out, you and the collective you, the team has carved out this space to support learners. And I want to know how you're doing that. Is there a discussion space
Yep.
as part of this course? Can you tell us a bit about that?
So the course, the way that it's offered is that a course is free online through Coursera, right? So the Coursera website is in the US. And it's a massive thing. So we have 19,000 learners, right? Which 7,000, like half, well, a fraction of those are active all the time. So in the course, and this is Coursera's model, is that we have a discussion board, and people can discuss and engage and ask questions and stuff on that on that uh, on that board. Um, so, uh, so I have a TA who focuses specifically on just monitoring those discussion boards because people are doing that on a meta level, right? Doing that sort of circle in time engagement on a big level. So people from all over Canada talking together on the different topics, right? Um, so so they're doing that through Coursera, and we have cohorts. So we do have start times. You can do this course whenever, but we do have start times, so people do follow each other, and then they can talk to each other that way, right? And my TA, if there's any issues with like content or deep questions, she feeds it back to me, and then we figure it out, and then we send it back to them. But we're constantly engaging this large group of people. So she works about 12 hours a week, just monitoring and engaging these discussion boards. But it's very huge, right? Very big undertaking. So And then we offer it as well as in a course setting at the University of Alberta, where it's the same material, but we add more readings to it and more academic engagement. And there, it's still discussion boards, but it's more exams and stuff. But really, because it's so broad, we have to do it in these discussion board forums, which don't offer much in terms of personal connection. It's more anonymous, which also leads to sometimes a lot of problems around trolling and things like that. But not too much. People have been very, very sensitive and very engaging. But I think this Morinville and the Okanagan is engaging it to take this as a tool for your specific community. That is the dream. Just take this and go with it, right? You can download all this material yourself. Um, you can download all the PDFs. You can watch all this on YouTube. It's totally available for you. Yeah. Yeah, so Krista is saying she had only learned about the fur trade and the Riel Rebellion in Canadian history. Absolutely. Thank you, Christina. Sorry, I keep saying Krista, but Christina. The type is so small. My old eyes don't see it. I went to school in small town Saskatchewan in the 90s, the 80s, right? And we lived right next to Batoche. My family is connected to Batoche in historical ways and contemporary ways. So we only learned about Riel because the professor did his own work, right? We only learned about Indigenous history that way, but otherwise there was nothing. There was nothing on treaties. There was nothing on how Indigenous people were partners of the fur trade, and especially nothing with residential schools, the 60s scoop, or even today's elements of injustice that are happening with social services and the justice system itself. So this unfortunate silence is endemic to how Canada sees history, right? So we hope that this course offers a nice change of scenery, or like a transformation of the way we see this country and the way we talk about being Canadian, right?
I know it's quite a big undertaking to design and launch and continue to facilitate something like this. But even in the different communities that are working together and working through this course, I want to know, Paul, if you have any advice for anybody who is hoping to bring this into their community, and how they might do that, and what are some of the important things that they need to remember when they do that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question, because this is my role. I'm not an expert. We have our expertise, each of us, but I see this as a community project, as something that emerged out of our community here, Treaty 6, Edmonton, Papa's Chase territory, right? The University of Alberta Faculty Native Studies. So for us, it's the libraries have been a really strong push and organizing factor for communities, and I mean small town libraries. It's libraries are the front line for people, for the community, right? Like, everyone goes to the library, no matter who you are. So I would approach each library, the libraries that you are close to, talk to them about this Indigenous Canada course, and say, let's do a learning circles around this. Let's reach out to Indigenous people who come to the library, who are connected to the territories that you live in, right? And get people involved, draw it thematically. One thing that EPL was doing is that through our faculty is that we'd have special speakers about each of the themes, right? So we had Matt Wildcat, Dr. Matt Wildcat, or almost doctor, from our faculty here, who's from Musqueam First Nations, which is south of the city of Edmonton, and he spoke about treaty and the history of treaty and the work that Musqueam is doing to take ownership of their education system using traditional Cree philosophies, right, and ways of being. And it was fantastic. It was so much fun to hear. So really reach out to the people who are there on the ground that can push the learning forward in an Indigenous way, possibly, right? But also, if you're in high school and stuff, is to do these kinds of to do a 12-week course with like grade 10s or 11s. I think it's perfect for like high school learners to learn something to break the silence of that is in our education systems, right, about Indigenous experience and identity. So those would be to reach the general community, to reach our young people um, on how to listen to Indigenous experience, right?
Excellent. Those are so many good recommendations for ways to find this in your community, or also to bring it to communities. And once again, I love how you're taking this global perspective, and you've built the framework to bring that local, and that's really a beautiful thing
Yeah.
for a public to see, and for Canadians to be a part of. I do want to jump back to some of the basics real quick, and then I have a question about art to finish this off. And of course, anybody who's in the room who might have a question about this course, about the information we've heard today, please feel free to ask those questions. Paul is here for that. What do people need to be able to take this course?
They need their ears and their eyes and their and their hearts, I guess, you know. I'm being joking, but like you don't need anything. This is a like 100, 200 level course for a university course. It's a great introduction, but it's an introduction done by Indigenous people about Indigenous people. That's what's really rare about this and really special about this, right? So you don't need anything. You don't even need money. It's free online. You can find it through the Faculty Native Studies website. Click through there. We could give you the links too. Um, but you don't need anything. You could do it for a certificate for like $60 American or something, and you get a beautiful certificate with my name on it, my signature on it, which is really sort of special. I don't know. Um, but yeah, it's really um, about unsilencing, I guess, or about unsilencing this history of Indigenous engagement and Indigenous engagement with Canada. So it's really about telling that story in a way. So yeah, and another thing too, that in terms of we're talking about discussion boards, is that this is a beginning course, right? This is just a first step. You can go further. A lot of people would be like, well, this didn't go far enough with this topic or this topic, or that some people would say that like, or you're being too nice looking over history and things like that. But I feel to respond to those things, this is for a general audience, right? This is for people who want to hear these stories for the first time or for the 100th time, right? So this is just a beginning point. It doesn't delve deep into things too far to lose our audience. And this is the first time of our knowledge, this is the biggest Indigenous Canada MOOC in the world. So it's about Indigenous people. So let's hear Indigenous voices, right? So
Yes, that was
yeah.
exactly the answer I was hoping for. So, I mean, I think maybe people need an email address, but if you're here, you have one. So it takes only a few seconds to register, and it's got the course sets you up in a great way. So even if you haven't been in a traditional learning environment, this isn't that. It's online. It's at your own pace. You find the time during the week to do the
Oh yeah.
coursework,
You
reading, and watch the videos.
do it as a family. Yeah. Do it as a
Yeah.
family, like Christina's saying. She's doing it with her 9-year-old, and it's like children learn so much, they all absorb everything, and like this is a great thing for them to engage in, for sure. Thanks, Christina.
And so just expanding off of your last comment, Paul, which is this is a beginning, and it's a lot of information for some, and for some like Joanna, it is scratching the surface, right? So what do you recommend for people who have completed the course? Where do they go?
Um, it depends on like where you want to go. Like, depends on what you're interested in, right? Because this is thematic. You can be very interested in women and Indigenous women and their roles in the fur trade or anything like that. I would look at the course materials that we offer and delve into the bibliographies and read those books. Go toward those articles because a lot of the and this is unique for us as well, is that we go towards Indigenous scholars, right? So those Indigenous scholars need to be read if you really want to go in deep into it, right? So go to the bibliographies and check it out. Um, but also go, if you're in university, do a Native Studies course. I know that University of Manitoba, University of Saskatchewan, University of Alberta, University of Lethbridge, um, in the prairies, they have strong Indigenous Studies or Native Studies courses and departments in our faculty. So go there, do a minor, not minor, but like do an elective or something like that. I know that Trent have a good program. University of Carleton do. U of T, York. They'll have courses in Indigenous studies. But the reason why I say Indigenous studies to focus in on Indigenous studies because it's part of our discipline, right? It's not just anthropology of or history of, or it's Indigenous people thinking through this material, these experiences, these narratives, and these relations. So I would definitely, go there if you can, right?
Thank you, Paul. That's great. So what you're telling me is that the further learning is actually built right into the course, and there are many places, depending on what people are interested in, for them to continue to
Yeah.
explore those topics.
Yeah.
Mm,
And you can feel free to take those courses. You don't need to be Indigenous to take Indigenous studies. That's the best thing, right?
yes,
And
that's a great point.
distance learning, yeah, is available through university or faculty. This course is an online course as well, where you
Mhm.
delve deeper into each thing. But there's not much in terms of later. There's no MOOC or courses that are offered online that I know of yet, but like that offer uh, a deeper discussion. But you just have to look at each faculty or each department to see, Bill, if there's distance learning. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. We're going to try to do that. Send all members of parliament to take this MOOC. No kidding.
So we are
No
at the
jest.
hour. Traditionally, I would wrap up really quickly. For everybody who's in here, I'll say a quick thank you for being here and joining us for this presentation. I do have one last question for Paul, and it's because I'm personally interested in the artwork that is featured throughout this course, and taking a little second to ask Paul to describe how that artwork is incorporated, because I think it's really special. So, Paul?
It's very special. Yeah, yeah. And I didn't have a chance to talk about it, so I'm so happy you talked about it. It's an integral part of our of the course itself, not just the branding, but like the way that the course is relational. So like if you see here on the course, here's a painting that was done by Leo Dorian, who's a really amazing Métis artist from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where the region where I'm from. And each panel here has something specific to do with this is the topic or the theme of this one is women, right? Indigenous women, and it's one of our favorites, right? It has the turtle here, and Sky Woman who comes down. This is Turtle Island, and we have here like a Red River cart and the sash, um, Inuit throat singing and dancing, um, blanket ceremonies, and like all these different panels here that reflects the importance. Well, here we have here I don't know more, and the importance of women in political organizations and mobilization. So it's really incredible, an incredible panel to explain the different themes and importance of women, Indigenous culture, Indigenous communities and nations, right? Um, but she made about 6 tableaus that she talks about in the MOOC. She does this interactive piece that she really delves down into her process and what these are like teachings and what they mean for each of them. So she'll do one. This one's on women. She does one on labor, does one on politicization, on environmental movements. It's like it's really excellent. She's an excellent artist, and the tableaus themselves are just really engaging. Like everyone I talk to are just like there's a heart connection to her work. So we're very proud that Leah did this work for us, with us, right? So yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to describe that, Paul. And thank you also for taking the time for being here and sharing this information about the Indigenous Canada MOOC. It's not too often that this big thing comes across and that we have the opportunity to go behind the scenes and take a look at how it was constructed and the goals and the intentions and how it is doing. And it seems like there's a few different start dates for Indigenous Canada this course.
Yeah, and I can send you all that information if you need, like the different cohorts, if you want to join. But you can start anytime.
And finally, again, I will thank Paul for taking the time for being here and preparing for this presentation, and all the incredible work that you are doing facilitating this Indigenous Canada MOOC. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your interest and your presence. Thank you.